Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to those watching me on Zoom. If you're watching me on Instagram, I'm going to be looking at the Zoom screen a little bit longer than I will be your screen. So I will send you the link if you would like it. So we're going to get started. Today, the Inner Circle workshop is on the inner child. And our focus today for this training is I want to start firstly by saying we'll be working through some deep stuff, and I want to acknowledge that this level of work that we are doing, talking about this kind of concept of authentic self, this wounded inner child that each and every one of us has inside of us, it's deep work. It's really deep work, and this is kind of a process. So it means it's a long journey. You know, it's not just going to be you watch this workshop and suddenly everything of your core wounding is fixed. We all want to heal, but it really doesn't happen overnight. This is simply just the beginning. This concept can make you feel very triggered, scared, uncomfortable, uneasy, nervous. It can bring up a lot. That's just it. It can be hard to identify with your inner child as well. And I'm going to go into that a little bit further down. So I want everyone to leave today with a good understanding of what the inner child is, because you might be thinking, what the frick even is my inner child? And that is going to open the door to reparenting the inner child, which we'll probably work on next week. Our goal is to understand truly what our inner child is, because if we don't understand what it is, then this part of you, especially if you have no contact or you're having a really time connecting with it, it's not going to be in your consciousness. You're not going to really understand. If you don't know what it is, how the heck are you going to start to work on the healing there? So I want to help you understand and unlock your wounding. So I like to think also of the inner child also as kind of our core wounding, or our core programming. And then we're going to find a way to support and love our inner child so he or she feels safe. And just a reminder that today all of us here will be on different levels of our journey. So this might resonate with you, it might not yet, but it's going to be here. So maybe in months down the line, or maybe in years down the line, you're like, I remember Maddie did that thing on inner child work, and now I'm ready for it. So don't worry if you're not there yet, or if you've already worked through this will be a nice refresher. Like I said, it's a continual journey. So just because you've worked on this already doesn't mean you can't continue to work on it as well. So also want to touch on, before we get proper into it, that a few of you watching this are parents yourself. And what can be quite triggering as a parent is a lot of our own core wounds from our childhood can be brought to the surface when parenting your young. And I'm not a parent, I've only got fur babies, my 2 dogs, but what can make parenting so hard, what I believe anyway, as someone who's not a parent, is because we all have this inner child within ourselves. So when we are trying to model and teach and shape another human as they enter an envelope through this world, we are only able to model or pass on what is shown to us, unless you do the work. And this is not me having a dig at anybody. Like I said, I'm not a parent, but a lot of us know that maybe our childhoods weren't ideal, and we picked up behaviors or programming along the way, which we carry into adult life, which isn't also ideal. And we cannot model what we think is ideal if we were never modeled it off first, if we've never worked on ourselves. So I'm going to quickly go into something called generational trauma, very brief overbringing. My grandmother, my mum's mum, was in a domestic abusive kind of relationship with my grandfather. So in order to make sure her children were safe, my mum, my aunties and uncles, there's about six or seven of them, Jesus, she would, you know, hit the kids to make them go to bed. My nan is a wonderful person. My grandfather, when I did get to know him, was a great person. He had overcome his alcoholism. But what I'm trying to say is my grandmother modeled not great behavior to my mother and her siblings, because she was trying to protect them. And the only way she knew how to protect them was through aggression, to keep them away from my grandfather, essentially. And my mother is not an aggressive parent. However, from her upbringing, she has experienced a lot of trauma, and that has changed her programming, and it's made her very emotionally unavailable. She used to, I think, dissociate. So we think about the 4 Fs, the fight, flies, freeze, or fawn. My mother would freeze and she'd go into her own fantasy world. So then bringing up me, she's an amazing lady. I want to reiterate this. My mother is incredible, but on an emotional level, she was pretty crap. She didn't, not because she's a terrible person, but because she was never modeled how to handle emotions. Therefore, I was never modeled how to you know, have good emotions. So if I had a child prior to maybe 4 years ago, I'd probably have a 4-year-old now which didn't really know how to regulate their emotions either. However, from about 4 years ago, I started this work on my inner child. I'm still doing it. It's been a very triggering journey. So this is what I want to think of this concept of, well, it's not concept, but generational trauma, is if you have experienced trauma or some kind of wounding in your childhood, unless you break that cycle, unless you actively work on it and do the work, you are going to pass it on to your little ones, because you can only show and model what you know. You can't teach people how to regulate their emotions if you don't know how to regulate your emotions. So 4 years ago, I would not be teaching you this because I wouldn't have the answers. And I still don't have all the answers, but I have an idea of what does work because I've done the work myself, and I've worked with therapists and looked at different concepts as to what I think is the best way forward. So just want to, again, brush on that. I've digressed a little bit there. But this is essentially why so many of us do this work on ourselves, because many of us haven't had emotional, physical, and spiritual needs met in the way we needed as unique individuals that we all are. So we were not modeled how to do that. And these 3 core needs are really important: the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. So caring for the physical self, caring for the emotional self, and caring for the spiritual self. But there's 3 other core needs, which are: we need to feel seen, we need to feel heard, and we need to feel safe, so that we can authentically express ourselves. Now, remember, we are all so unique as individuals. So what works for me might not work for you. So don't get down if you try modalities and things that I offer and they don't bring you any growth or expansion of your conscious self. That's fine. That means, okay, that's not the path for me. Let's try another one. So just a little recap there. So those are our core psychological needs. We need to feel seen, we need to feel heard, we need to feel safe, so we can authentically express our emotions and ourselves. When those things don't happen, however, so when we don't feel seen as a child, we don't feel heard, we don't feel safe, then we carry wounds in our subconscious. And I think subconscious is like the back of the brain, really, really deep. And it's so, so powerful. And the inner child is essentially, so when I say inner child, it's essentially the accumulation of whether our needs are met or not. So the physical needs, the emotional needs, and the spiritual needs. But also there in our subconscious, all the way back here, is our suppressed emotions. So if we didn't feel seen, if we didn't feel heard, if we didn't feel safe, we didn't feel safe enough to authentically express our emotions, so we suppress them. So maybe we weren't able to energetically bring them out and up into the outer world. Another thing that's in our subconscious back here is our creativity, our spontaneity, I can never say that word, our play, and being in a state of joy, but also our ability to connect with others. And I want to highlight this because it can seem really doom and gloom when we're thinking about, core wounding. And, inner child work is focusing on wounding and when our needs weren't met. But I also want to highlight that we also need to invite in more creativity, more play, more joyful moments. They need to be awakened within us. So it's not all doom and gloom. We get to do some fun things on our healing journeys. So it's not just about the wounding, it's also about inviting in more play. And that's why I love yoga, because it's playful movement. You can explore your body a little bit, and it brings back the ability to be a bit creative and a little bit more joyful and fun. So just want to explain very briefly, I wasn't very creative growing up. I was a sheep. I would follow the crowd with trends, with anything. I didn't know who I was because of this. Everyone, they'd be like, oh, she's so this or she's so that. I was like, I don't know actually who I am, because I've never been really creative because it had been suppressed so much because my wounding had taken over my life. And it was only through yoga that I was able to reconnect with creativity, with being a bit spontaneous, being more playful in a state of joy. And also it, of course, deepened my connection to others. So this inner child work is looking at ways that we now can learn to meet our physical needs, our emotional needs, and our spiritual needs a bit better, or a bit more uniquely to us. But it's also about reconnecting with the positive aspects of being a child, as I've mentioned, so presence, connection, joy, love, play, intuition, creativity, spontaneity. So we can get so focused on healing, on the wounding. So make sure you also give back to yourself with something positive. I hate the word positive, negative, but positive aspects too, like play. So moving on. In terms of getting our needs met, to be seen, to be heard, to be safe, I'll repeat these a lot. So to get those core needs met, a foundational piece of this is security. To feel safe, to express your vulnerability. So a lot of us maybe didn't feel safe in our upbringing. And coming back to conflict, if you lived in a house with a lot of conflict that wasn't dealt with in a healthy way, you probably didn't feel safe. I was exactly that person. I didn't feel safe in my own home. I didn't eat with my parents at the dinner table. I'd eat in my bedroom. I'd make an excuse. I got work to do. If I wasn't in the house on my computer, I was outside with friends. I was never home because it wasn't a safe place for me. I felt safe in the company of my friends. Not because my parents were dangerous, but because the atmosphere was really unsafe. And like I said, there was a lot of conflict. So if we don't feel safe in our bodies and our relationships, then we cannot allow ourselves to be or feel authentic. So safety allows us to express ourselves. I want you to remember that. Safety allows us to express ourselves. Again, think about the people you spend your time with. Or the people you open up to. They're usually those that you feel safe around. You know, they're not going to judge you. They're not going to go off on one. They're not going to, you know, have a go. So yeah, just want to remind you, safety allows us to express ourselves. So we understand now that the inner child is housed in our subconscious mind, all the way back here somewhere, where you'll find our physical, emotional, and spiritual needs, also our suppressed emotions, our creativity, our ability to play, to be joyful, and to connect with others. So that's our inner child. So let's go back in time and think about, why is this such a problem for all of us? So think about when we're born. We can't remember it, right? But humans are a species who are not totally developed. We cannot look after ourselves physically, so we need a caregiver. We are so physically dependent. However, we are also very emotionally dependent. We have no idea what feelings or emotions are or how to navigate them. But then spiritually, on that third core need, is actually quite interesting, because we are actually quite connected to ourselves as spiritual beings, as babies and as children. However, most of us then are conditioned out of it. But the important part about childhood is remembering that we are totally dependent, okay? And when we enter this world, we are deposited into some kind of family system unique to you. So again, I had mum, dad, and eventually a sister. You could have been born into, I don't know, just a one single parent family. You could have been in the foster system. You could have been adopted. I don't know your background. Again, it's unique to you. But because we are in this state of dependency, it's important to remember that our brains are still developing, onwards up until our 20s even. So depending on whom, and that's depending on whom you listen to. So we're going to come back to numbers about age and when we learn behaviors. But yeah, we're still developing, you know, for the first big portion of our life. But our brain does develop, as I've just mentioned, well into our time as an adult. So our brain is picking up and developing cognitive processes and abilities as we're developing from babies, but still for a long period of time. And when we are little, our brain is in something called an egocentric state. Don't confuse that with egotistical, I'll go into that in a minute. But egocentric state, which literally means we cannot take somebody else's perspective outside our own. Or we can't see the world through another person's eyes. We can only see the world through our eyes. You know, we can't be empathetic, okay? So we think things happen to us, for us, and everything is about us. That's what we think as a child. And like I said, this is not the term egotistical, which gets thrown around a lot these days, because when you're in an egocentric state, we do have the ability to develop empathy. Okay, and empathy is my ability to step outside of my experience and then see it from another person's experience, knowing what I know about them. And that does develop later in life, whereas egotistical is that lack of empathy more as an adult. And it, you know, there's all kind of personality traits off that, like narcissism or narcissistic traits, etc. So that could be another whole hour and a half workshop there. So why is this a problem? The problem with this egocentric state is if we are filtering everything that's happening to us through this egocentric mind, then we are making everything about us in unhelpful ways. So for example, maybe you had a parent or a caregiver that came home from work really stressed out, and they come in, you say something, and they just lash out at you, and they're like, wah, 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 wah. From that child's perspective, because the child isn't able to be like, oh, do you know what, dad or mum, they've had a really hard day at work, that's why they're stressed, I'll leave them have their space. That's why he's uptight. And the only thing the child can actually think, because they can't understand that, is, oh my God, they're angry at me. What have I done? What have I done? Well, was it because I did that? Was it because I said hello? You know, they start to question, okay, well, it's my fault. It's my fault that they shouted at me. And they think that, oh, I'm bad, I'm not lovable. Oh, and then they feel that they're unsafe. And everyone's story can be different here. So maybe you had a sibling that was the same, an older sibling that was always shouting at you, and you thought, oh, I'm a bad person, I'm this and that and the other. Again, you might not remember these, but these are what builds our core wounding. So now if you can imagine, this might just happen once, but if this happens more consistently, now we are creating possibly problematic beliefs about ourselves, or we are not enough, or we are not this, or we are too much this, or we are that, or whatever. Another example is not understanding that feelings are different between people. So when a child is upset, they think everybody is upset. So they think everyone shares emotions. They don't understand that people can feel different ways, okay? So what then happens as we progress and develop over time, we are forming beliefs about ourselves, about others, in relationships and the world based on those really early years. So the beliefs I have from pre-7-year-old about a relationship, the relationships I observed growing up were toxic. They weren't good relationships. So I then, as I grow older, didn't see red flags of toxic, not toxic people, but people that weren't good for me. And I ended up in relationships that became very toxic. And to me, that was normal. People were thinking, Maddie, get the heck out of there. But I thought, this is what was modeled to me. For me, this is normal. So that's a really interesting thing. If you think about any past relationships, whether that's in a friendship or an intimate relationship, noticing if there was problems, was any of that similar to what you were modeled growing up? Again, it's all just being conscious and starting to connect with that. So let's have a look. So because we are exposed to these things over and over again, that's when they become beliefs. So if you just hear it once or twice, maybe not so much, but when it's in repetition in your life, that's when it gets a little bit more problematic there. So now it can be possible that we never move out of that egocentric state. And for a long time, I lived in the egocentric state where I thought everything was about me. If someone was upset, I thought it was my fault, even though, and I'd be like, what have I done? Was it because I said that? Was it because I did that 2 years ago and suddenly they're angry at me? I would literally take everyone's, emotions as my own. And I still struggle with it. And it's really, or highly likely that even as we evolve and mature and we get to this developmental stage with empathy, that you can still slip back into that egocentric state. So even if you've done the work and you're like, oh, I'm feeling really good, I've worked on this, I've worked on my inner child, and then one day something happens and you're like back in that state of mind, I'll tell you what sets it off. It's when you are triggered. So when you get triggered, we go back, we lose empathy. So think about what happens when you're triggered. There could be somebody screaming or yelling at you, or maybe you've read something that's triggered you and you feel like everything really like, you go to the 4 Fs, that kind of fight or flight or freeze or fawn. And what goes away then is empathy. So for an example, I have said some horrible things to people in the past, in an argument maybe, or they said something triggering, like, I don't know, they could say a little comment and it's triggered me and I've blown up. And if I was able in that moment to step outside myself, use empathy to see it from their point of view, then I'd be like, oh shit, what I'm saying to them is really actually horrible. I'd hate to be spoken to like that. Why am I doing it to them? But when you're triggered, it's really hard to step outside of that. So we lose empathy and we become egocentric again. So here the inner child or the core wounding is being activated. And then the core wounds come to the surface, then old emotions that have been suppressed come up to the surface as well. And suddenly you're like trying to deal with these emotions that have been pushed down for maybe decades. And then we become lost in that egocentric state, sometimes temporarily, sometimes for longer periods of time. You're thinking in that egocentric state, I don't care about this other person's feeling right now. I just care about how I'm feeling. And this is just another form of protection. Again, going back to those 4 Fs, the defense mechanisms. So I'm mentioning this to you because I don't want you to think that when you work on your inner child, suddenly you'll never meet with conflict ever again within yourself or with others, and you absolutely will. And you more than likely will drop back into that egocentric state many, many times. All of us go back and forth here, but some of us spend more time here than others. And that's interesting. So even the people with the healthiest mindset and their mental health's really strong and blah, 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 they still will. They'll still digress into that egocentric state. And what I want to mention here, I'm not sure, again, if anyone struggles to remember their childhood, but if you do struggle to recollect kind of memories and you're struggling to connect with your inner child, then you can still do this work because you're reliving the behavior now. So even though you might not remember specific parts of your childhood and you're really struggling with that origin story, don't worry too much, because you can still do this inner child work, because you can heal the adult self to help the inner self here. So speaking from my personal story in relation to this is, which you may or may not know, I experienced a lot of trauma in my childhood. And what I want to reiterate here is trauma doesn't have to be some huge, big event. People think trauma as, like PTSD stuff, like something that maybe in the army, or abuse or assault, whether that's emotional, sexual, or anything else, violence, domestic violence, or whatever it might be, doesn't necessarily mean the trauma is that. Trauma isn't the event which happens. It's how your body responds to the event. So for an example, me and my sister, same childhood. And there are many things growing up that happened to us both. And it didn't affect me much. I maybe got upset at the time, but I got over it. And to her, even to this day, she still struggles with it. So it was really traumatic for her, but for me, it was okay. And that's simply because my system reacted differently to her system in relation to the event that happened. Whereas on the other side, there's been events that happened to them both. It's really upset me and it's stuck with me and it triggers me to this day. And she probably can't even remember that event. So that's, I want to touch on trauma. So some people think, oh, I had a really good childhood actually, but yeah, maybe you did on the surface, but maybe your dog died and that was a traumatic event for you. It could be literally someone shouting at you and it really scared you. And to this day, you're traumatized by it. So don't worry and think, oh, I haven't had a traumatic childhood, Trauma isn't just a big event. So I do have quite limited childhood memories. I find it hard to envision myself as a child. The only memories I have are from like home videos I've watched, so I can replay them in my mind. But other than them, I don't remember much. And you don't have to be able to access your memories because you are, like I said, living them through your daily behavior. And it's around about 7, 8, 9, I don't know exactly, that we begin to develop the perception of others. So that's when we develop a bit more empathetic traits. So I want to go on down now to beliefs that we hold about ourselves. So I always talk about limiting beliefs, but there's other beliefs as well. And beliefs are areas that lots of us struggle with. So we all have different beliefs about how we care for our physical self, like our self-care habits. For some, self-care is a bath, for some it's a big run, for some it's this, for some it's that. But I want you to think about now, maybe even pause the video. Think about the self-care habits you do for your physical self. And this could just be simply having a shower every day, feeding yourself, the hobbies you do. And think about if they are benefiting your body. Because you might have a self-care belief that maybe your parent had. Maybe, for example, some parents' self-care, if they abuse a substance, could be getting really drunk. Maybe that's what you do when you need to let off some steam, you get drunk and think, is that actually benefiting my physical body? Think about that. So it's your sleep, the food you eat, the recreational activities you do. So feel free to pause. I'm going to carry straight on. But for me, again, I like to relate it to myself to get a bit of an example of what I'm talking about. But I was hyper independent from a young age and kind of figured out self-care on my own. I always remember going to school one day and looking at myself in the mirror and being like, my hair's oily. I didn't know what greasy was, but greasy, oily. And I was thinking, nobody else's hair is. And I got really self-conscious about it because my mother had never really told me that you should wash your hair to stop it getting dirty. I didn't know that. And it might sound so stupid, but honestly, from 8, 9 years old, I remember being like, why is my hair so dirty compared to everyone else's? And again, I didn't have a bad childhood. My parents did let me wash, but they wouldn't always wash my hair. And I started to learn by modeling other children in school and noticing what they did. And I'd even ask how many times do you wash your hair a week? Because I was my hair was always looked dirty and I just slicked it back because I didn't know any different. And it sounds really silly. And I even moved out when I was 15 because I felt I had the ability to meet my own physical needs because I'd learned to cook from the age of 10, proper stir fries and proper dinners, because my parents weren't great at cooking as well. They weren't really there ever cooking. They would just get something out of the freezer. And I kind of knew that wasn't what I wanted to put in my body. So whilst I was physically independent, emotionally, I absolutely was not. So next, our beliefs are about our emotions and being born dependent as an emotional being. Think about now, what was modeled to you in regulating emotions? So again, you can pause here, you can journal a little bit. So think about, were you taught how to regulate them? Or was that lacking in your parents or your caregivers? And you're not sure, think about how did they model, regulating their emotions? Did they not regulate them? Did they just scream and shout or shut down? Or did they talk their emotions through? Did they encourage you to talk your emotions through? Think about when you had a tantrum. Or think about if you have a child, when they have a tantrum, how do you react? Do you get tantrumy too? And do you drop into that child state? Because that's what a tantrum is. It is a child state. Or are you there to soothe them? Or do you give them some space? Do you ask them what they need? So, and again, I'm not trying to tell people how to parent. I'm not a parent, so just a disclaimer. Don't get angry at me. But I do read a lot about parenting because I find it really important, and I want to make sure I'm a good parent when I have the opportunity to do so. So if anybody does want some links or some really great content on Instagram, there's an account you can all follow, let me know. An amazing parenting account, she's incredible. So yeah, I digress again, but just think about, were you taught to regulate emotions, or was it lacking? And the way you cope with emotions is kind of a remnant of the past behavior you witnessed, either because you modeled what your caregivers did. So again, my mum couldn't regulate her emotions. She'd flee, she'd freeze, she'd shut down. So then within myself, I did the same. And because as a child, I learned, okay, when things get tough and emotional, I can just run away from it or ball it up, because that's okay, because that's what my mum does, or that's what people do, because that's what I observed. And that can be really damaging, because then if your parents do act in a way like that, your caregivers, they kind of withdraw from you. They cut the connection, because if they can't talk about their emotions with you, there's a connection lost. It's gone, boop, it's been cut. And when they do disconnect from you or withdraw from you, what a child thinks is, okay, they're withdrawing love from me. So they feel like they're not good enough. It comes back to, I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, I am not this, I am not that. So my inner child modeled behavior as an adult what my mother and father modeled to me. I know when we go for this, people were thinking, bloody parents, what knobs they were, excuse my French, but they're not. You gotta remember to be compassionate, because they are only modeling behavior to you what was modeled to them, and then from your grandparents, from their parents and their parents and their parents and their parents, until someone breaks that cycle. Okay. And then I want to go into beliefs with spirituality. Now, I believe, and I'm sure many of you here, maybe not all of you, agree that we are spiritual beings. And there's another aspect to us that basically isn't our emotions and isn't our physical self. And that's like a connection with something bigger. Whether for you that is religion, or connection to the universe, to the earth itself, or maybe just your connection with consciousness. And in my opinion, children are very expressed spiritually. They're very spiritual beings. Just like animals, I find animals really spiritual beings. And they are always their authentic self. The pivotal moment is, what is the response? So what I mean by that is, say there's a child, hypothetical child, who is really artistic, and they are within a very creative and artistic family, then that child may continue to actualize and show themselves artistically later in life. However, in contrast, that same artistic child is within a family that doesn't support his or her artistic flares, then maybe the reaction of the parents or caregivers is negative. Then maybe as an adult, this person may squash their feelings and their creativity to mold into the family, leading to problems due to the internalizing of these feelings and these emotions and these flares they have. It can also be known as maybe denying your reality. So going on from that, denying your reality is something that happens to little one, well, to all of us, even in adult life. In adult life, you can think of it as gaslighting, still having your reality denied. And an example of this is, let's use an example of, maybe you had I know this is again hypothetical, but maybe there was a parent in the house that was an alcoholic or something, or of some, they were off their bin, to put it in a better way. And maybe, say it was a dad. Say your dad came home and he was really, really drunk, and it's happened a lot. And you're like, Mummy, what's wrong with Daddy? Because on a subconscious level, they're like, something's not right here. He's intoxicated, but you don't really know what that means. And your mum goes, oh, nothing, darling, he's fine. So something is wrong. That there's something clearly wrong with your father, but you've been denied that truth. Your mum said, no, everything's fine. So you start to think you can't trust your own intuition, or you can't trust yourself. So we then become the adult that feels like something is off. Maybe we like, oh, something doesn't feel right here. But then we're like, actually, nah, it's okay. And then maybe later down the line, we realize our initial kind of intuition was true. Or maybe there was a case where there was something like, a drunk father, but it was ignored. Your mum kind of ignored it. So you ignored it to model that. And it was never spoken about, which also denies your reality. So I want you to think about intuition as kind of meeting yourself again. Some of us are really connected with our intuition. Some of us aren't. I aren't. I'm not. I'm still working. I'm getting better. But like I said, I always was a sheep. I never trusted myself because I had my reality denied. An example for me, my mum and dad had an argument. My mum left, and she said it was for work. She said she was going away to work for a few weeks. Didn't know when she was going to be back. And I remember her leaving being teary, but she would never, you know, she worked away now and then, and I, you know, only for a few days, and my dad would go for a few days depending on work. And I remember her giving us both a pillow, me and my sister, and being like, I was crying, like, please don't go to work. But I knew it wasn't work, but she told me it was work. So my reality had been denied. So I didn't trust my own judgment from a young age, because I was never giving the whole truth, even though they're doing it to protect us. You know, my mum and dad didn't want to say mum's just going away because we need a break from each other. They didn't want to say that to me and my sister. We were young, you know, they didn't want to upset us and think, oh, they're going to break up. So we were denied the reality of the truth. So many of us, like I've just said, don't trust ourselves because we were never shown how to. Maybe as a child you said, oh, look, something's wrong with dad, you know, he's intoxicated. And she just said, oh no, darling, he's just tired. But you know he's intoxicated on some level within you, even if you don't know what that means. So you've been corrected and you think, okay, well, I clearly can't trust my own judgment, I'm wrong. And then another belief is something I want to address is when or if you've ever been told you're too much, too sensitive, too performing, too serious, too weak, too this, too that, I don't know. And you know, for me, I was told I was not too, but I was told I was very sensitive, a lot, very sensitive. So I started to think, okay, maybe I am very sensitive. Whether I was more sensitive than anybody else at my age, I don't know. I had this deep connection with animals. I would cry over animals. You know, I was very connected with animals and people, and I got upset about things. And I was told I was very sensitive, to the point I started to kind of think of sensitivity as a weakness, because that's how it was portrayed to me. And when we think we're too, you know, so I thought, okay, I must be too sensitive. And that's probably a belief that was, you know, it was formed in childhood, but then I carried that into adulthood. And just because I want to remind you, a little public service announcement, that those things that someone said to you doesn't mean you are. So if someone said you were too much, you were too hyper, you were too serious, you were too this, doesn't mean it's your truth. It's their perception. That's nothing. That's not it's not based on you. And maybe you were told something about your abilities. Maybe you were told you're not strong enough, or you're not good enough at this, you're not clever enough to be in maths, or I don't know, whatever it could be. And maybe you were someone who was taught or urged to overstep your own boundaries. And this is a kind of form, or another form of the above, of invalidation. So example of this, I'm better with examples to get my point across, but I was a really shy kid. I was told, oh, don't be so shy, just go do it, be nice, don't worry, it'll be fine. Once you've done it, you'll feel great. So it's basically like you feel insecure or you feel unsure of a situation, but somebody overrides you, usually your mum or dad or your parent, with that and takes your voice away. So even though you're not feeling good about a situation, you're told, do it anyway. I have one vivid memory from a childhood that was a school party. I was young. And it was a thing where all the boys put their hands up in arches, I think, or was it the other way around? And, you know, the girls had to run through when the music stops, the boys put their arms down, you have to kiss them on the cheek, okay? And I didn't want to do it. I was really uncomfortable. I was like, I don't want to be kissed by a boy. I was really young. I was in primary school. I don't want to kiss a boy. I don't want them to kiss me. And my mum, and I was sitting out, I was probably the only kid not wanting to get involved. I was very, very shy. And my mum was going, just do it, just do it. And I was honestly like, I froze. I panicked. I remember being like, this is like the worst thing that could ever happen to me, having to play this game. And again, looking back now, I'd be a bit of a laugh, that game. But at the time, it was really, really damaging. And it really damaged my perception of boys as well. I became scared of boys. Weird, I know. And I'm happily in a relationship. But these things can really affect us into adulthood, okay? So don't just push them and go, oh, that was nothing. It could be really something big. Another way that we can be invalidated is maybe you were told you should be more like your sister or your brother or your friend. And before long, maybe you agree that you should be more like somebody else. And this can lead to self-resentment and insecurity about yourself. And it can lead to behaviors that are self-sabotaging as well, because you think, well, who I am isn't enough. I should be like them. And I did this a lot. Many of us did. I did a lot of these things, we think. And I was told I should be more like my sister when it came to sport, because I was not sporty, funny enough, growing up. And then we can keep going on with this, all these beliefs. Maybe someone comments on your looks. Again, it's happened to me, it's happened to a lot of us. But another really damaging belief we can have from childhood, and this is a really problematic one, because we can't always understand this due to the lack of empathy when we're in that egocentric state, is that when we do start to develop that perception of others, we start to think that we are responsible for the emotions of others. And again, another announcement, we are not responsible for the emotions of others. And I want you to think about how many times you told something like this to a child, which was like, you know, don't do that, don't make me hit you, don't do this, or say that to mum because it'll make her mad, don't tell dad that, or you'll get him angry, or a version of the above, okay? And the belief from these things are, okay, I am responsible for somebody else's emotions. I have to be good to keep them happy. And it's kind of like an underlying feeling of responsibility, which you shouldn't be put on you as a child. And you've got to remind yourself, if there's something you connect with and resonate with, that this is not true, okay? You are not responsible for others' emotions. If you do something and upset somebody else, it's up to them to manage how they respond to you. Of course, that doesn't mean you have a free pass to be really horrible to somebody because you're going to upset them, but you've got to stop thinking that people's problems or people's emotions are your own. So just again, another little reminder for you there. So like I said, all the above I've just waffled on about beliefs are common and frequent beliefs that we experience, or maybe we just witness in other people. Maybe you witness your parents tell your sister, you should be more like so-and-so, and you thought, okay, maybe being ourselves isn't how we should be. And there is a lot of ways that the inner child has received these messages. There are a lot of ways and moments that we do not feel seen or understood, or feel like we have a safe space to be validated authentically. And when we are carrying these wounds with us, we have a lot, and I mean a lot, of unexpressed emotions. So maybe your family didn't express or discuss emotions as an adult. So you struggle to bring your inner world now to the outside, to decipher your thoughts and feelings, therefore repressing them and harboring the anguish inside. And for those of you who are having difficulty just seeing the world of the upper child, maybe you're just feeling upset because you don't know how to connect with the inner child. And I do want to assure you again that it is there. I want you to have, or urge you to have, the patience with yourself and also with the process, because the most important steps of this process is beginning it and then observing with the knowledge of what you know now as an adult, and doing so without judgment towards yourself. Because a big wound that we carry is because we didn't feel like we had the space to be authentic and without judgment. Then because we didn't have that space, we feel like we don't have it now, and then we continue the cycle, and we teach others, we teach our young maybe even to be that way, unless you go the opposite way, of course. And the first step is just acknowledgement. So this is like the steps of working with your inner child, just acknowledging that you have an inner child, whether you can connect with it or not. Then witnessing your inner child, your wounding and your conditioning. So taking pauses in your day when you're feeling triggered, start to question, okay, what is triggering here? Why do I feel emotionally triggered? Why? Where have I felt this way before? Okay. And again, you might take some time. You're not just going to instantly have the answers. Maybe write it down. Why am I feeling triggered by so-and-so down the street not waving to me when I pass them? I don't know, whatever it could be. So yeah, the first step is acknowledgement, then witnessing your wounding, and then seeing the inner child, hearing her or him, and giving them space, giving them space to process. And then just start to watch what happens. So some will notice that maybe we aren't the kindest to our inner child. So think about when you are feeling triggered. Maybe you're saying to yourself, oh, I do it to myself, oh, for God's sake, Maddie, get yourself together, stop being such a baby. Why are you feeling so angry about this? You should be happy, you should be this. And that's like, denying, again, our inner child the freedom to express what is going on inside of us. Because it could be from years ago, but it doesn't mean because it hasn't been dealt with. It's going to be dealt with sometime, or it's going to keep reoccurring. So if you have I have the same cycle in relationships. I get in a relationship, it was lovely, it was amazing, and then it would break down and I couldn't fix it. And that happened over and over again. I just thought something was wrong with me. And well, it was, I wasn't connecting with my emotions and regulating them. So the same problems that would arise in relationships, I had a block that I couldn't figure it out, and then I just suppress it again because it was too painful. So as you do start to observe, you become more conscious, and then consciousness builds connection. Big thing, connection. So like I said, I want you to start to watch what happens. Notice if you're being a bit unkind to your inner child, and remind yourself that you cannot know and you can't behave in a way that you weren't taught, okay, or you haven't learned. So if you were never taught to regulate your emotions, you can't expect yourself now as an adult to do so. So be patient there. Start to learn how to regulate your emotions through practices such as breathwork, such as meditation, which we're doing on this course essentially. So like I said, if you weren't taught to model or to handle your emotions, you can't expect yourself to be able to control your emotions when you were triggered in some way. Okay, it's a process you've got to keep following. And I hope you can start to see over the next weeks how foundational these sessions are. They're kind of built up on top of one another. They can be done in any kind of order, really, but they intertwine in so many ways. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences as well between them. But essentially, they are the building blocks of healing or finding our true self, but also in learning about ourselves and even others by recognizing patterns within them. So I want a little reminder that connection brings us consciousness, so like that presence, which brings about observation. So when we're present, we're able to stop, observe what's going on, and then we can get more objective with our observation. We can be like, okay, I'm observing that I'm triggered now. Okay, why am I triggered? And we can go a little bit more specific into that observation. And when we start to observe, we create space, we create a bigger pause, and that space is between our conditioning, so our programming that we were modeled, and our authentic self. So like, okay, right now, I am acting in a bit of a, how do I describe it? A bit of a childlike state. I'm having a bit of a tantrum here over something. That isn't me. I'm not someone that has tantrums. How can I get to my authentic self? What can I get to the surface? What can I express here in a healthy adult way to help me break down this barrier of my conditioning? And again, this can be really overwhelming. So don't worry if you're feeling overwhelmed. I'm here. So let me know if you need me for this. And within that space we have between our conditioning and our authentic self, we can choose responses from our wise self, so our self now that is learning. And that self has understood the conditioning and knows it's not to be the whole truth. So we know, okay, this is our conditioning, this is our programming, but it's not always true. This can be undone. What we learn, we can also undo, which is the amazing thing about the brain with neuroplasticity, which we will be doing a little segment on. And the side of us that does know better can then learn to reconnect with ourselves, and then can find better ways to honor the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs that need to be met within us. And that is not the inner child anymore. That is it's not the inner child that is overwhelmed with energies and emotions. That wise self is the adult that can relearn how to recreate safety. So that's really important. As an adult, then we can recreate safety and security in our bodies and in our nervous systems so that we can actually tolerate and feel an emotion, process it, and then return back to the baseline. So before we finish here, I just want to let you know that when we are experiencing emotion, the actual emotion is only really present for like 30 seconds or something. Don't quote me exactly on that, but it's around 30 seconds, maybe no more than 90 seconds. And anything you experience after that is you reliving the emotion because you haven't processed it. So if you actually process it in a healthy way, you've processed it, you can then move on. So through this practice, which we're talking about today and last week, and just in general, this coming back to ourselves, through this practice, we can find our way home to ourselves. We can observe and reconnect to ourselves. We really do live in our minds way too much. So we need to get out of our minds back to our body to recreate safety for our emotional, our physical, and our spiritual needs. And then just finish. Let's face it, we do need relationships in our life. We are social beings, and we crave the emotional intimacy that you get from a relationship. So that's why we're drawn to relationships. It's that intimacy. But we jump into relationships a lot of the time before actually knowing and understanding our own needs. This was my problem. I've just touched on above. I was saying how I was relationship was really toxic. It kept breaking down. I'd be heartbroken, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, if we don't understand our own needs, then nobody else will either. So if we don't know what to ask for, if we don't know what we need, how the heck do we expect anybody else to be able to give us that? So first, when you get to know somebody else and understand somebody else, we have to first come back to ourselves. Excuse my dogs, they're going for a walk. So first we have to journey back to ourselves and to understand our own needs, our own limits, and our own boundaries. Because if we don't understand our own, we're not going to be able to understand anybody else's, and we're not going to allow anybody else to understand our own because we don't know. So if we don't know, how the hell will somebody else know? So spend the next week now observing your inner child. I will give you some reminders for those that are on the course right now. If not, sorry, you watch this on playback afterwards. But so spend the next week observing your inner child. Maybe write down some things that come to mind. We will be doing some work this week, things like a meditation on the inner child, some journaling. We'll maybe get into a bit of a theme with our yoga flow as well, reconnecting to that inner child. And yes, if you have any questions in the meantime, I'm here for you. Please speak up. you know, the inner child in me honors the inner child in you. So please, please, please speak out if this is quite intense for you. Lots of love to you all. Thank you for bearing with me, and I shall see you all soon. Thank you.